Welcome to the Dr. Broadway Podcast, the musical theater history podcast where a couple of doctors sit around and talk about Broadway. I'm your co-host, Dr. Kristin Stultz Pressley, joined as always by Dr. Tracey Brent-Chessum. What are we doing today? What are we talking about?
All right, well, we're starting a new micromester. Still love that word. Still love the word. Moving on from, our obsession with the jukebox, moving into Bookish, which is what you've named this one, which I really like. But all of these musicals are based upon books. And what's interesting about this is that, this is how all musicals started for a while. Everything was based on a book, right? And it wasn't, and then all of a sudden we'd get original musicals, but even original musicals had some sort of source material. It's interesting that now we have to kind of give it its own title when this seems like kind of historically what Broadway has done forever. So.
Right. You're so right. Like, think about Showboat based on Edna Ferber's novel.
Yeah.
Think about South Pacific based on Tales from South Pacific.
Carousel based on, all of them.
Yes. How to Succeed in Business is based on a book, believe it or not.
The King and I, everything. Even Chicago based on a book. Little collection of stories.
And Sound of Music.
Yes.
Based on a book.
Yeah. Wicked, based on a book.
That's right. They all used to be bookish.
They did, indeed.
They did. Well, I dare say, I'm not going to say all. But the majority of them used to be bookish.
There we go. Very much so. So today we're looking at The Great Gatsby, which, of course, is based on the 1925 book by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Tell me, Kristin, we all had to read this in high school. How did you like it in high school? The book.
Okay, let me tell you this.
I knew this was going to be good. I didn't even prep her for this.
But it's funny because I was actually going to bring this up. I never read it in high school.
No.
If it was assigned, I did not do that reading, which was not atypical for me. So, in high school anyway. So I've never read it. As I have been doing the research for this podcast, I'm like, I need to get a copy of this. And in fact, as in doing the research for this episode, I also kind of went in a little rabbit hole about F. Scott Fitzgerald's daughter, Scotty. And I ordered her biography, which should be delivered any day now. But I'm interested to read that. But I do want to read it because it kind of wet my whistle for it. Now, I went to a Christian high school, so I don't know if that had anything to do with it.
I went to a Christian high school too.
And you read it. I don't know.
I read it.
I can't answer it. My suspicion would be that it was assigned and I did not do it.
Okay. All right. There we go.
And I am woman enough at 48 years old to admit that.
It's interesting. Great Gatsby for me kind of falls in the same category. Well, F. Scott Fitzgerald falls in the same category in my brain as like an Ernest Hemingway, both of whom my brain cannot handle.
I get that.
It's very easy because it becomes very polarizing very quickly, like a J.D. Salinger kind of writer too, where it's at 17, my brain just thought these, the person who's writing this book is a jerk and I want nothing to do with them. And
really?
So I don't even remember, I remember nothing of these books. Yeah. And I remember having to slog my way through them to try to pass the test. And then just dumping everything off of my brain. But I just remember just having rage against the writer, and I'm not really sure why.
No, but I've had that. I've had that with Pat Conroy, which is so bizarre.
That is bizarre.
Pat Conroy, I know.
Having grown up in the South.
But that was my problem. So to me, Pat Conroy was always writing about the South and his experience in the South. And yet he was always kind of rejecting it and talking about how awful it was. And I'm like, Pat, you've literally made a career writing about the South. You are biting the hand that feeds you. And it just ran all over me. Now, I read his books and I enjoyed his books, but I still would have this angst against Pat Conroy for that, exactly like you're describing.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's, part of me kind of feels like it might be just the male centric point of view of the 20s and 30s,
yes,
and like
yes.
how that works, and I mean it's a time, you know, now having gone through grad school, understanding that it's a time when American manhood is changing drastically,
right.
and
yeah.
watching them kind of negotiate it, and how, you know, how different men negotiate that change. You know, I understand that, I think, now, but I just remember being like, oh, I hate those. I hate those. I hate that kind of, I hated that part of like 11th grade English class. I was like, I just don't want to read these men. Like, I don't know what it was.
right. But
and it's not, please don't hear that it's like, I just don't like American male writers, because that's not what I'm saying. It's just from like the 20s, 30s, and 40s, they just piss me off, and I don't know why. And I'm like, well, I feel that way about other people too. So
I totally get it. And it's interesting because you know, if you talk to Kate Kerrigan, who wrote the libretto for this, one of the things that she really wanted to do was get into the female characters, because she felt like that was so lacking in the book. So you're not wrong, and you're not the only person who's noticed that. And maybe if I ever read it, I will notice
you will understand that too.
But I just haven't read it yet. I will say, with the writer like Hemingway, he's one that I don't recall him being assigned either in high school. And then after school, like I read Catcher in the Rye by Salinger. I read that probably in my 20s because it wasn't assigned. Well, maybe it was, and I didn't read it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I read it on my own because I wanted to read these great writers, you know. And
I read it when I was 30 and kind of loved it.
Then. I know, me too.
And my brain went, maybe I need to go back and look at this, like relook at this. But like the 17-year-old that still lives inside me will not let me do it. So,
I totally understand. But I really like Catcher in the Rye too. But when I read Hemingway, I had the same reaction you did, which was, this man is not even a good writer. Is that can I even say that? But like where was his editor? You know?
And it's so funny because generations. I have a former TA and former research assistant who just can't get enough. Like, went to Key West and just lived the Hemingway life for like a long time, and just wants to be the, you know. I'm like, why? Why would you do that?
I get it, but that speaks to, and that's something that I have on the docket to talk about today, is kind of the American canon and how it was built and why it was built and why did certain things get plugged into that canon and other things not get plugged in.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because what we're going to find out as we get into our conversation about Great Gatsby is that when it came out in 1925, it was a flop. Like, it was a massive failure, particularly given that it was Scott Fitzgerald's third book and the previous two had been really successful. So it was a big flop that kind of sends him down this spiral that lasts for the next 15 years until he dies prematurely as an alcoholic at the age of 44. Mm-hmm. So we're going to get there. But before we do, and before we step away from jukebox musicals, I want to ask you, and I should have prepped you for this and did not, and I'm sorry, because I just thought of it as I was walking out to my car 30 minutes ago. Is there a catalog of music you would love to see mined for a jukebox musical that has not been? And again,
gosh, you're putting me on the spot.
I know, and forgive me for that. I can't really think of one. I thought of Taylor Swift, but we talked about her on one of the episodes.
We'll get there.
Yeah, it'll happen at some point.
And that's the only one that I like. That's the problem. Is like, okay, I mean, I can think of 2 or 3 where I'm like, ooh, that might be interesting, but I don't know that they have enough. They don't really have enough stuff to really pull from to make it work. You know, like most of the ones I was like, ooh, this might make this would be good in it. This is a good musical theater kind of song. Like, this would really work somewhere. But a lot of, you know, you need somebody who's had quite the career, and really the only one at this point that's had quite the career that hasn't done one or hasn't said absolutely not.
Right.
Like a Taylor Swift. So
you know what hasn't been mined is country music. Like, we don't, I mean, Dolly Parton obviously notwithstanding, but she transcends, I think, genre. So she's coming.
And that's coming to Broadway.
That's right. It just
Yeah.
had a run in Nashville at Belmont University and then is
Yeah.
coming to Broadway. So, but other than outside of her, like, it seems like there are a lot of catalogs that would fly, and it might not fly in New York necessarily, but I imagine it would play pretty well around the country,
Yeah.
like in regional theaters or community theaters, even once the rights were released. But I'm a country music fan, and I can
Yeah.
think of
Well, because they,
many big George Strait, Garth Brooks, like
yes,
there's
all
so
of these
many,
things
Reba
that are
McEntire.
storytelling music.
That's
All that
absolutely. And one of my
true.
favorite contemporary country music songwriters is Brandy Clark, who
Mm-hmm.
co-wrote Shocked. Her catalog of music, Shucked completely notwithstanding, and we'll talk about that later this season, but her catalog, every song is a musical. Every
Yeah.
song. It is so good. It is so good. And it would be such a great musical. Again, I don't know that it would play New York, but it would certainly play Charlotte and Atlanta and Nashville. You know what I mean?
Well, because we talked about that when we talked about um, oh gosh, the, um, the Toes in the Sand guy,
Oh, Zach Brown?
not Zach. Okay, no, that's not it. The
Jimmy Buffett.
Jimmy Buffett.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Y'all, my brain can't do names anymore, especially on the fly. I make notes about everything.
I do not remember talking about Zach Brown on this podcast.
No, but I always kind of conflate them because I was like, I don't know, we're on the water and we're drinking beer, and so that's a lyric that stuck in my head. You're right, totally different band. But looking at the Jimmy Buffett musical, we did talk about the fact that it started on Broadway and they thought it was going to go mad, and it didn't because of where it started. And I think that is an interesting thing that we're going to find is that things are going to start touring in different directions. I'm writing a conference paper of all things right now about just kind of like the state of BFA education. And one of the things that I've been looking at is the number of jobs on Broadway versus the number of jobs on tour versus the number of jobs in other places. Because if you've been listening to the news at all, universities are starting to use that as a metric. After the recession, they started using kind of the metric of how many students you had. You needed a certain SEH value. And so all of a sudden we were trying to kind of flood our departments with numbers of majors. And now they're going, but they all have to get jobs at the end. That's the metric that we want. And so I was looking at that versus the number of jobs on Broadway. I can talk about that another day.
I would love to hear that.
One of the fun things that I'm finding is just the fact that another big conversation that's happening is that our musical theater shows that are being brought to Broadway cannot recoup their capitalization. $25 million. We talked about this, I think, a couple weeks ago. It's a $25 million capitalization, and they run for a year and make their grosses equal out to about $90 million, but those are just their running costs, and they cannot pay anybody back. And you start looking at the finances there, and I do agree that they're not as transparent as they probably need to be.
Right.
But I'm kind of watching the order of events of a musical's life start to change on us. If you look at the Great Gatsby. Oh, wow. Gatsby? Oh, Gatsby. If you look at this particular musical that we were talking about today, it's interesting because not only is it on an American tour, they've taken a non-equity tour to Japan.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
And the only reason I know that is because I have a former student in it. And so I'm seeing all their pictures from, their run there. And I'm wondering how many tours are going to try to cut costs by using non-equity performers, and do the touring route first. Do kind of that thing and then go to Broadway. Because the cost is so much higher. That's kind of, I'm looking at the numbers and going, Oh, that's going to be a very, very interesting swing if that's really the way it goes.
Well, and that's a great point because, generally because of the way that they're packaged on seasons, even shows that aren't heard of. I remember seeing Dirty Dancing, the musical, which never made it to Broadway. And I don't believe The Bodyguard has ever played Broadway. Nope. There were several right in a row that came through that were part of the season in my hometown, and it was just as full as the rest because you buy the whole season.
You buy the season.
So while I wouldn't necessarily have bought a ticket for Dirty Dancing the musical, the fact that I had a season subscription, well, I'm not going to not go, right? Yeah. I've already paid for the ticket. So that is a really interesting route to take because in spite of what's happening on Broadway, and here I guess we could acknowledge Paulson's article, although I know when this episode releases, it'll be 2 weeks in the rearview mirror.
But it was just yesterday when Kristin sent this to me.
Yes, it was just yesterday that it was published, and Michael Paulson in the New York Times says Broadway is in big trouble, basically.
Yeah.
Now,
there's Equity released a statement.
There. Oh, what'd they say? I didn't see that.
Equity released a statement like the day before, basically saying, y'all, this is fear-mongering because we're renegotiating our contract. So they're trying to cast doubt on the fact that we're asking for more money, right? We're asking for, better compensation, and they're trying to play poor. That's what Equity said, kind of.
Well, and the producers, I'm sure, leaked that story to Paulson. So I'm sure it's all strategic.
Because the other thing is that if you look at the Broadway League, if you look at their website, the number of audience members and the box office grosses are above what they were in 2019. So before the pandemic. So we have fully recovered.
Rebounded,
we have gone beyond that. So we are now making just as much money as we were before. And while I agree that we've got some residual back issue problems, you just kind of go, wait a minute, how are you reporting these numbers and still saying we can't cover costs?
Well, ironically, I was, deep in the archive doing some research last night after reading that yesterday morning. And again, we're recording this on September 23rd, so don't get confused. The article came out September 22nd. But I was doing some research last night and I found all these articles by Paulson from last spring where he's talking about we had 15 new musicals open in the last 9 days or whatever. Yep. You know what I mean? And I'm like, well, you can't have it. You can't talk out of both sides of your mouth and say, oh, Broadway's going to die. And, oh, we opened 15 new musicals in 9 days, right? You can't do it. So I think I would tend to agree with the fear mongering aspect. However, I would say, and you know what else I'll say? I've been in the archive enough to know that producers have been sounding this alarm since this. I mean, the earliest I saw it was the 60s. So since the 1960s, they've been saying, we can't keep up. We can't keep up. Okay, there you go. Even farther.
No. We can't write our own shows. If we have to write our own shows and use homegrown talent, how will we? We will never, we just bring the whole production from London. This is ridiculous.
Yes.
This is a theme, y'all.
Yeah. It is recurring. It is recurring. But I will say that while the one takeaway that I had from that article, mostly I was kind of
what is this about?
Yeah. I was mostly I'm not sure. But what I did notice was that production costs have far outpaced the rate of inflation, while ticket prices have remained steadily with inflation.
Yeah.
So in other words, we talked about the top ticket price for Les Mis in 1987 was $45. Well, when you adjust that for inflation, you get $130. Well, what's the average ticket price today? $130. Whereas, you make Of the I Sing in 1931 for $100,000, which is the modern equivalent of $2 million. And you see how the production costs have way outpaced inflation, but the ticket prices haven't.
Yeah.
So that was my big takeaway, was thinking, okay, they've got to figure out the production cost problem. What is the problem here? Because that's
it's
the issue.
internal. It's
Yeah,
internal.
that's the issue.
And equity would say, look, it's not us. We just want it to be, that's what equity is arguing, is that they're not being fairly compensated and all the money is going to these other things. But then you've got producers saying, look, we can't even pay back the investors and they're going to stop investing and you're all going to not have jobs. And so there's, as we know, whenever capitalism and art butt their heads together, the truth is somewhere in the mud. Right?
That's exactly right. Exactly.
So it's just a matter of kind of trying to figure out. There was a huge increase in the amount of shows. There was a big backlog of shows, obviously.
I thought that was a great point. Yes. I thought, so if you didn't read the article, the point was made that some suggest that this is because there were a lot of shows that were going to premiere in that 2020 to 2021, 22 window that didn't get to premiere. And so now they have premiered, but also the shows that have come after those are premiering. So we've just got this like deluge of new shows happening. I think that's a fair point.
It is a fair point.
I did think that was a good one. But suffice it to say, if you read that article 2 weeks ago, by the time this episode hits the airwaves, if you read that and got very nervous, so take our word for it that there is nothing new under the sun. As Tracey always says, history is cyclical, and we have seen this all before as historians. None of this is shocking outside of the production costs. But again, I saw producers in the 1960s sounding the alarm on production costs, saying, we just can't sustain this. Well, that was 50 something years ago, and they've sustained it. So they found a way to make it work. So relax is what I would say. Right?
Yep.
Okay, I guess we should talk about The Great Gatsby. I guess that's why we're here.
Perhaps.
So here we go.
There is an interesting point about this musical, is that there is a companion musical.
There is.
That I did not mention. So this is Great Gatsby that opened about a year ago. There is another Gatsby, an American Myth musical that's premiered, did its out-of-town tryout at American Rep Theater in 2024.
That's right.
I know we'll probably talk more about that later, but that is not the one we're talking about right now. This one has already had its Broadway review.
Yes.
And is out on tour.
Thank you for that clarity. That's absolutely right. This is The Great Gatsby that premiered at Paper Mill Playhouse in New Jersey in October of 2023, hit Broadway April of 2024. This is that production currently running on Broadway. But we will have more to say about Gatsby and American Myth towards the end of the episode. So let's start with F. Scott Fitzgerald. Let me just give you a little bit of background about him. He was born and raised in St. Paul, Minnesota. His father was, from what I've read, a failed aristocrat. I am not sure. I mean, I guess that means his parents had a lot of money, but he didn't do a lot to, build that empire. That's how I would interpret that.
His money didn't continue to make money, and
it
just got spent.
He just kind of lived off of generational wealth, is what it sounds like to me.
Instead of creating it at the same time, yes.
Yes, but I did think it's interesting that Fitzgerald is named for an ancestor, Francis Scott Key. So that F. Scott Fitzgerald, he is named for Francis Scott Key, who'd authored the Star-Spangled Banner, of course, and was related in some way. I'm not exactly sure of their familial connection, but that is where his name came from. And clearly, when you name your son after the writer of the Star-Spangled Banner, you're obviously trying to anchor him in some sort of, Gatsby and American Myth. That sounds like an American myth to me. If you're a failed aristocrat. I'm going to say aristocrat for the rest of the episode.
I would really like to see the movie, F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Aristocat, though. I really would. I just keep thinking about it and
Thomas
being like,
O'Malley, the alley cat.
The cat, yes! Wow.
I think that, tell Michael Paulson, we have a hit. We have a hit in the making right here.
We do.
At any rate, so if you are trying to anchor your child in an aristocracy, in an American aristocracy, you talk about an American myth, then right here, this is what you do. You name him after Francis Scott Key, right? So I think that's interesting. And it does seem to give a little bit of insight into who his father was. So he was born in 18, or F. Scott Fitzgerald was born in 1896. In 1911, and this is very important, this is very formative. He is about 15 years old and he's sent to boarding school at the Newman School in Hackensack, New Jersey. Now he's coming from St. Paul, so he is solidly Midwest. He's sent to the East Coast, and this school was very upscale and described as, quote, quintessentially Eastern. So I interpret that. I don't know about you, Tracey, but I interpret that, I think, a Kennedy kind of upbringing, right?
Yeah.
Like
It's
highfalutin, right?
it's kind of modeled like it's like a kid from this, middle of London, like ending up at Eton and like that. We I mean, obviously schools still exist in the United States, but it's not the same as it was back then when they were trying to kind of replicate that system.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So, he goes and he is obviously a fish out of water. These boys have grown up together. They know each other. Their families know each other. They summer together, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And Fitzgerald hasn't grown up as part of this world, at least not this particular world. And so he is clearly a fish out of water. And the fact, he tried very hard to fit in, and the fact that he was resented by his classmates for the ways that he tried to kind of worm his way in to their social circles and was rejected really scarred him for life. And so I think we see those sorts of themes continue to emerge in his writing. But I also think, that sort of rejection at such a pivotal moment in your youth can also lead to things like the alcoholism that later killed him, right? You can see the connections here. So he stays in the East in spite of that, and he goes to Princeton for college. And it's at Princeton that he really begins to fit in. He's clearly a literary guy, or wants to be, presents himself as such. And really, you hear about the guys, Cole Porter and Lorenz Hart and Richard Rogers, and they all have these Ivy League trainings, right? So this was a very common thing. He goes to Princeton and he fits in. He immediately is given some leadership in the literary circles there at Princeton, and he falls in love with a woman named Minerva King. But after they break up, he flunks out of Princeton. So he has to kind of collect himself, get his life back together, and then he returns to school. But because he's been gone, they've taken away all of his leadership positions in these literary circles, and he decides, I'm done with this. I'm going to skip school and join the army. Now, this, of course, is during World War I. So, he joins the army in 1917. And in 1918, he is stationed in Montgomery, Alabama. And that's where he meets Miss Zelda Sayre, the daughter of an Alabama Supreme Court justice. And they fall truly, madly, deeply in love. He moves to New York and starts working for an advertising agency. They get engaged. And for whatever reason, Zelda breaks off the engagement temporarily. He gets very drunk and goes on a real, kind of gets lost for a while in his alcoholism then in response to her breakup, and moves back to Minnesota. And while in Minnesota, he starts working on a novel that he'd first started writing when he was a student at Princeton.
Just to break in here.
Yeah, come on, break in.
One of the reasons why she breaks it off, his life parallels what's happening in The Great Gatsby quite a bit.
Right.
But one of the reasons that they say that she broke it off is because he wasn't making enough money, and she was like, you need to make your fortune before and be able to keep me in a manner that I am
accustomed to.
Yes,
right.
Accustomed
she
to.
She is an Alabama debutante, like daughter of a Supreme Court justice.
You need time, and then when you've got your act together, then of course I will marry you, kind of a thing.
That's exactly right. And to your point, he was making $90 a month writing advertising copy in New York.
Yeah.
So that did not go as far as it would need to go. I mean, if you've seen any of those Rush Talk videos on TikTok, you know how much those young ladies spend on their clothing and purses and earrings and all the accoutrements. Yeah. So definitely Zelda was a precursor to that, and she wanted to be kept in the lifestyle to which she had become accustomed. And Fitzgerald could not provide that. So he goes back to Minnesota. He publishes a book that he had started writing at Princeton. It comes out in 1920. It's called This Side of Paradise, and it is a huge hit. And it's described as talking about jazz age morality, which of course was a huge transition for this country. This is a
Yeah.
moment of massive change in this country. When we think of jazz age, we think of decadence, we think of flappers, we think of, all prohibition, all kinds of things that play into this story and into The Great Gatsby as well. And certainly that comes out in This Side of Paradise. It's a huge hit. It's about a guy who goes to Princeton and gets involved in their literary circles and then has several failed romances.
Yeah, so he writes from life, right? What you know.
He writes
you know?
what he knows, doesn't he? He writes what he knows. So then, of course, to Tracy's point, suddenly the success of this book has brought him the means and the notoriety that brings Zelda right back into his arms, and they get married. The following year, their daughter Scotty is born in 1921. In 1922, Fitzgerald publishes his second book. It's called The Beautiful and the Damned. And it, interestingly, is about a couple who is waiting to inherit a large fortune. But once they get the money, they realize there's not much left.
Did his dad die like right before he started this
I
book
don't
or
know.
something?
That is an excellent question. I did not dig into that, but I do know that they subsequently moved to the French Riviera in order to avoid having that same outcome in their own lives. So it definitely, I mean, it could have been her parents that had died or were expected to die or whatever. But definitely it was cutting close to the bone, right? So in 1924, they, with their little daughter Scotty, I love that name, Scotty, for a little girl. I think that's so cute. But they moved to the French Riviera, and it's there that he writes The Great Gatsby. I can't say it either.
I know. I did that. That's my fault.
It's funny. There was a play. I think it was 2010. The public put it on. It was just called Gats, and it was these workers in a office who were reading The Great Gatsby. The play ran for 6 to 7 hours because they were literally reading it word for word. And at different times they would act out moments from it. But in essence, it's just the reading of The Great Gatsby. And they called it Gats. And I wonder if they shortened that name because they were like us and couldn't say Gatsby without stumbling over their words.
Perhaps.
I don't know. So he's got 2 books that have been big hits, and then The Great Gatsby comes out in 1925, and guess what? It is a flop. It is not popular. It's one reviewer says it's no more than a glorified anecdote and not too probable at that. And they criticized Fitzgerald for being far more interested in maintaining its suspense than in getting under the skin of its people. So characterization was way off for reviewers. And they thought it was too short. He wrote short stories largely. And so this one, I don't know how long the book is, but it's no more than, just over 100 pages, I believe. So it's not like a massive tome. And that was that was taken against it, held against it by the reviewers. In spite of that lack of success, there's a 1926 Broadway play adapted by Pulitzer Prize winning playwright Owen Davis, and it's a hit. The Great Gatsby, the play in 1926, is a big hit. It runs for over 100 performances, which is a really big hit for a play in that time period, and it tours to other cities. And that adaptation was very warmly reviewed, unlike the book that had inspired it. Yeah. So just thinking timeline, Chicago the play premiered 1926 on Broadway, and Showboat is 1927. So we're right in the middle of some really big things happening on Broadway. But in the aftermath of the failure of the Great Gatsby, Scott and Zelda's lives begin to fall apart. In the early 1930s, she has the first of a series of nervous breakdowns and is in and out of sanitariums for the rest of her life. In fact, I recently read that she died in a sanitarium here in Asheville, North Carolina, where I am. The hospital caught on fire and the patients couldn't get out. So
Oh.
it's just unimaginable to think of that. But that was 1948. But she was for a time here. It was called Highlands Hospital, and she was here in Asheville. So anyway, her adult life could not have looked less like her childhood, right? The way things
Hmm.
played out. Zelda is languishing with her own mental health issues, Scott is constantly drinking. He's constantly battling alcohol. He goes to Hollywood. He continues to drink. And though he sometimes comes to visit Zelda and their daughter Scotty back east, he's mostly on the West Coast for the rest of his life. And he dies in 1940 at age of 44. And she dies in 48 here
Hmm.
in Asheville. So, The Great Gatsby, up until this point, had only sold about 10,000 copies. Again, that pales in comparison to what his previous books had done. And it certainly, you hear that and you think, well, how in the world did it become the greatest American novel, which
Yeah.
is how some people have come to look at it. And this is really interesting. So, in World War II, you're probably familiar with the idea of the US government giving ration packs to its service people, right? And so, often that would include, any food stuffs, whatever they might need. But in World War II, in particular, they would give soldiers a carton of cigarettes, a pack of condoms, and a books, and military issue copies of books, right? So like a book of the month club for soldiers.
Yeah.
And one of those books, and I don't know why it was selected. Maybe it was, some have suggested it's because of its length, because it wasn't so long that they couldn't read it. It would fit easily in their packs or whatever. Um, I don't know the answer, but for whatever reason, it was chosen to be one of those books. About 100,000 copies were given out. Well, then those same soldiers can't come back, and by way of the GI Bill, education, higher education kind of explodes, right? Because
Hmm.
these soldiers are able to get an education and have it paid for, and the academy begins to want to grapple with what is our American identity, right? And so that's where we see The Great Gatsby, which had been read by all these soldiers, kind of come at a moment in time when it just struck gold, right? And
Hmm.
that's when it takes off as the book to end all books, representative of this moment in time in American culture.
I mean, it's almost written. I mean, it's written in the midst of the Jazz Age. So, like in the
Yes,
middle of it, it's
yes.
kind of like that first person. This is what's happening around me kind of book as he's
Yep.
writing it, and people don't want to look at themselves critically
Right.
at that point.
Right.
But 20 years later, it's a good time.
Well, Tracy, I love that you said that because I had not thought of that timeline, but you know what we've talked about?
We've said
How we
that,
talk about
yeah.
wars 20 years later,
Uh
right?
huh.
And here we are, we're talking about the Jazz Age 20 years later when we are and maybe it's the people who were in their youth. They have matured and have enough wisdom and years of experience that they can look back and see things differently. Maybe that's what is the magic of that 2 decade waiting period. Um, I don't know, but interestingly, along those lines, and we won't go too far down this bunny trail, but I do think it's interesting. American Theater just published the most frequently produced plays this year.
Yeah.
And one of them, well, the number one most produced musical, I should say, is Come From Away. And,
Which I was surprised by. I went, really? Oh.
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
And
I love it, but I was like,
yes.
I'm really surprised by that.
Well, but think about our timeline.
Yeah.
So,
Mm-hmm.
that play, now part of it is because it's just become the rights have just become available. So I
Yes.
understand that, but also it's based on 2001, right? It's so
Mm-hmm.
we're right at that 20-year removal period, and so suddenly every theater that can get its hands on the rights wants to produce it. So I thought Boy, we've had that conversation a time or two on the
Most
Dr. Broadway
definitely.
podcast. So again, we see that same theme.
It's because nostalgia, and part of that is nostalgia. Like
Absolutely.
it takes us 20 years to look back and be like, oh, that was a different time, and remember what it's
Yes.
doing. It just, for some
Yeah.
reason, 20 years is
It's powerful.
Is a powerful chunk in humanity's conception of themselves. So.
Yep. Agreed. Now, Great Gatsby is not just popular in the US. Great Gatsby becomes a worldwide phenomenon, and it's read the world over. Now, how exactly it goes from American classrooms across the world, I could not begin to tell you, but I do know that it happened. And in fact, there was a young boy growing up in Seoul, South Korea, whose name is Chun Shu Shin. And it was one of his favorite books. He read it in school and he absolutely loved this book. Now, as time goes by, this young man wants to be a film director, but early in his career, he's given the opportunity to direct a musical. And after that, he never looks back. So he is directing musicals in Korea and having great success with them. But his big dream is to have a very successful hit on Broadway. Again, this his name is Chun Shu Shin, and he tries multiple times to have a big hit on Broadway, and none of them quite stick, right? So he produces the Rocky movie adaptation, which didn't last. He does a Tupac Shakur jukebox musical called Holla If You Hear Me in 2014, doesn't go anywhere. Dr. Zhivago movie adaptation doesn't go anywhere. And then shockingly, you would think this one would have taken off, but it didn't. Once Upon a One More Time, the Britney
Yeah.
Spears jukebox musical. So
But
he's got all of these really great IPs that he's trying to produce, but none of them go anywhere.
yeah.
So it stands to reason that he is going to try to make a run at adapting his favorite book from childhood, The Great Gatsby, into a musical and see if that can be his big hit, fulfill his dream of having a big hit on Broadway. And the timing was right because guess what? The Great Gatsby had been under copyright protection, but it fell out of that copyright protection in 2021. And so the time was right because suddenly you don't have to pay any fees. In fact, according to I think the great granddaughter, it's the granddaughter or great granddaughter of Fitzgerald who runs like his estate. And she said they didn't even know this musical was happening. Now, that's fine. They didn't have to let the estate know it was happening because they don't owe them any money,
No,
right?
yeah.
Like it's free property.
It's in
Public
the
domain.
public domain.
Yeah. So they were surprised by it. But nevertheless, so the timing was right to pursue this IP. And of course, as we have alluded to, they aren't the only ones who tried to pursue this IP, but we'll
Yeah.
get there. So he pulls together his team. We have a Broadway newcomer, Kate Kerrigan, music and lyrics by Jason Howland and Kerrigan's husband, Nathan Tyson, and then director Mark Bruni, who directed Beautiful, the Carole King musical.
And the thing is that these aren't, I mean, they're not, yes, they're Broadway newcomers, I guess, technically, but they have been around for a long time. Kate Kerrigan is part of Kerrigan and Loudermilk, who in the teens, the 20 teens, just churned out story song after story song after story song, and they're done in audition rooms all over the place, and lots of cabarets, and everybody knew Kerrigan and Loudermilk. So it's like, it's not that she was an untested or unproven kind of property. Nathan Tyson works on both Amelie.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Which Philippa Sue from Hamilton goes ahead and stars in, and it's kind of a bit of a flash in the pan, but it's still a solid work that got all the way to Broadway. And oh gosh, my brain is gonna kill me. Tuck Everlasting.
Ah, yes.
He also works on Tuck Everlasting. So Tuck Everlasting, an interesting little show that it's really funny because it's like some people love it and some people are like, oh, it didn't really match the book or the movie, and that kind of stuff. So these aren't just, kids off the street on their first show. Like, they know what it takes. They've done a lot off Broadway. Some of them have done stuff in Broadway, but these are not major hit players where you can put these names up there and everybody goes, ooh, I want to see that.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. They're not Pasek and Paul, right?
They're not Pasek. Yeah. And they've got a, name recognition that some of these other guys don't have. So you're really relying, when you choose something like this, you really do have to rely on those stars. So, and we'll get to that
and also on the title. I mean, but you mentioned, and something we were talking about before we started recording, we have this bad habit of having really
we just
good
need
conversations.
To turn it on and stop.
We really do. I think, the handful of times I've listened to the Joe Rogan podcast, it just kind of starts with him talking. Like, there's not really, they're mid-conversation. That's what we need to start doing. It's just mid-conversation. There it goes, right? We're off to the races.
We should really turn this on.
Right? Let's start recording and have this conversation again, shall we?
Yes.
But you were saying, speaking of expectations, that there's a lot of baggage that goes with producing a property like this. Mm-hmm. So speak to that.
The thing is that my take on this particular musical, kind of reading through the critical response to it and everything, is just that when you have a musical that is, or a book, an intellectual property, if you have something that is so ingrained in the public zeitgeist, something that is well loved, something that everybody has to read in high school, you have a lot more people that you have to please. Yeah. I think that's a good way of saying it. And I think in this particular case, there's a lot of nostalgia that is not just about the 20s, but a simpler time in a lot of people's life where they learned something from someone else in a earlier time that we're having to kind of get around. Gatsby has had several movie adaptations.
6. To be exact, 6.
And how many of them have been qualified hits? Like, everybody agreed that it got it. It got the, but everybody went to see it. But everybody has an opinion on whether or not, the guy from Titanic is good enough as Jay Gatsby or whatever it is.
Right.
Like, everybody has a point. We talked a lot about nostalgia and how nostalgia can kind of get in a way. I think what's interesting about this particular show, if you are, going to go see it, is that you need to be aware of what you're bringing into the room with you, your experience with that show, but also not to let the critical commentary color it before you go and sit in the midst of it. Remember that it's like, this is your experience, not kind of everybody's.
Right.
That's what struck me this week as I was listening, and we can't let nostalgia ruin it for us either.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I think there's a lot operating when you use a title like this, and you have to be very, very careful. So while it may seem like, oh, this is going to be a slam dunk, everybody reads The Great Gatsby. So this is going to be a title that everybody goes to, and we'll just get 2 really good stars. And it could be the greatest musical in the world, or it could not be. It doesn't really matter. It just matters that name is there so we can get people drawn into it. And that's just not, we didn't really plan for the nostalgia aspect, I think.
Yeah.
I think we really do need to think about that. So.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, because when you think about shows, the biggest hits of the last 30, 40 years, they've come from out of nowhere. Hamilton came from out of nowhere. There was no expectation there, because who would have ever thought about writing a musical about Alexander Hamilton? Phantom of the Opera, Les Miserables. These are properties that may be known in other countries based on books, both of them. But we didn't grow up reading Les Mis in this country, right? No. So that was brand new to us. Phantom of the Opera, same, based on a book, but nobody read
Nobody's reading them.
Yeah.
We know it, but we've heard of it. It's in the kind of worldwide
canon. We know it was a silent
canon.
Film, Lon Chaney. We know all those things, but
then you look at something like Wicked, Whereas if it had just been The Wizard of Oz, notice there's not been a Wizard of Oz musical, really.
Right.
It's like, oh, I'm not going to touch that. Too much nostalgia there. You're going to hurt too many people's, understanding and feelings about it. So, but Wicked works because it's the story of what happened before or after, how this all that is
something that comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, it plays on this nostalgia in a good way and kind of adds to it, not it's bringing our expectations in. So
that's such a great point. Hadestown, Dear Evan Hansen, Come From Away. I mean, all of these big hits, Kinky Boots, they are things that are completely unfamiliar to, not completely, but largely unfamiliar to us. So that's a great point.
The expectation level with the rise of the jukebox musical, it's made people, I think, a little bit more like choosy.
Yeah, sure.
So they're able to be like, I don't know, this just didn't. It just didn't fit my, my thoughts about this particular artist or this, that, and the other thing. So
yeah. So with that team together, led by director Mark Bruni, like I said, he directed Beautiful, the Carole King musical, one of the great jukebox musicals that we talked about in season 1, didn't we? I think.
I don't remember.
I think we did.
Hold on.
I think it's still touring. I don't remember either. If not, I'm glad to talk about it. Okay. Then someday we will. Someday we will.
No.
It's a great story. It's a great story. So I will tell it sometime.
We will tell it.
Yes. I did tell it in my book, Jukebox Musicals, by the way. So if you got to hear it sooner rather than later, pick up Jukebox Musicals, which is available now wherever you buy books. But Mark Bruni,
I love it.
He directed Beautiful, the Carole King musical, and the show premieres at the Paper Mill Playhouse. Let me tell you a little bit about Paper Mill Playhouse. We did talk, we were talking off air about Annie and how it premiered at Goodspeed Opera House.
Yes.
This is similar in that it's very close to New York City. It's actually 22 miles from the Paper Mill Playhouse to the Broadway Theater where The Great Gatsby would transfer. Yeah. And so Mark S. Hobie, who is the producing artistic director at the Paper Mill Playhouse, says this is as close to a New York audience as you can get. And that's absolutely true. Mm-hmm. A lot of the cities that are chosen for these out-of-town tryouts are chosen because they have theatergoers with a sophisticated palate. Boston, D.C., Chicago, etc. They have sophisticated palates, so you can assume that they're going to have similar things to say that a New York audience would say. And Hobie
but it's not the New York audience, and we're keeping it away from them so that they don't kill it before we go to Broadway.
Exactly. Exactly. It's still not on Broadway, but you're getting the feedback from people who would frequently go to Broadway, right? This is a Tony Award-winning regional theater. It's also the State Theater of New Jersey, and it's best known for producing revivals, really solid revivals of great classic shows. It's been around for 90 years, but in recent years, it started producing a handful of new musicals. In fact, since 2012, it's very risky.
Very risky thing.
Since 2012, it's sent 5 shows to Broadway. One is Newsies,
which I saw
Honeymoon in Vegas. Did you really? Was Jeremy Jordan in it then?
Yes.
Was he? Okay. Okay.
It was the weirdest out-of-town tryout too. And one of the reasons we actually we drove up from Maryland. I was at the University of Maryland at the time, and Caroline and I got in the car and we drove up there and kind of saw the new songs and everything, most of which didn't make it to Broadway. It's a completely different show now. Yeah. But one of the reasons we went was we're like, why? I mean, I know it's Disney, and I know Disney knows that there's nothing that could really totally kill it. It's going to go to Broadway anyway, and it's going to be able to tour. So it's a little safer for Disney to premiere at Paper Mill Playhouse. But everybody was like, what in the world are they doing? Mm-hmm. I'm like, you're gonna kill it. So we wanted to see it. And it was not a finished production when we went up there. It was not what ended up on Broadway. They didn't learn a lot. I mean, and that happens all the time, but but yeah, a lot of people, I don't know. Anyway, it was a very interesting experience. So
yeah. Well, that's what happens with this too. Apparently, The Great Gatsby has gone through a lot of changes since its premiere at Paper Mill Playhouse. So they turned it around. It closes, I think, in November of 23, and then they opened previews start in March of 24. So they didn't have long to rework it, but they did do a fair amount of of editing on it. But anyway, in 90 years, the Paper Mill Playhouse is known for producing classic revivals. In recent years, it started doing new works, 5 of which have gone to Broadway: Newsies, Honeymoon in Vegas, A Bronx Tale, Bandstand, and The Great Gatsby.
Yeah.
So, like I said, this premieres there in October of 2023. This is astounding. Its entire run was sold out before it had even opened.
Nostalgia.
That had never happened at the Paper Mill Playhouse.
The potential audience for this title is
massive.
Huge.
Yeah, if you get it right, it could run forever.
Yeah, because everybody's, I know that one. Not everybody knows Newsies.
Right.
Nobody knew A Bronx Tale. So
right, exactly.
But
exactly.
Gatsby, everybody knows Gatsby.
Yeah, for sure. So this $25 million show transfers from the Paper Mill Playhouse, opens on Broadway officially April 25th, 2024 at the Broadway Theater. So just 22 miles across the river from the Paper Mill Playhouse. It stars Jeremy Jordan, who I mentioned, who was in Newsies, of course, and Eva Noblezada, Eva Noblezada. Am I saying that right?
I think so.
I have practiced that so many times for so many different things because she's doing a lot these days.
She's doing quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think what I first had to learn was with Hadestown. I was like, let me get this right. I want to be sure I'm getting this right.
Star in Hadestown, amazing.
Oh gosh, so good.
Yeah,
so good. So at any rate, they're the stars, of course, Gatsby and Daisy Buchanan, who plays opposite Gatsby, Jay Gatsby, right?
Jay Gatsby.
Yeah, and shockingly, it's one of those shows that Paulson was writing about that I talked about earlier that was trying to open in advance of the Tony deadline for 2024. The 9 shows in 15 days or vice versa, whatever it was, and it's nominated for only 1 Tony Award. It wins it. It's costume design by Linda Cho, which wins the Tony Award. But I was surprised that it wasn't nominated for more than that.
And I was surprised that it won for costuming. Yeah. Because there were so many people who were like, this is not right. Her costumes are not right. And I'm always like, okay, this is art, y'all. Like,
give
this
her
is
some
not,
room.
this is not like,
yeah,
can we stop being so realistic? This is not realism. This is musical theater.
I know. It's so interesting.
But it got real quiet real quick, didn't it?
Yeah.
And it was. Yeah. What else was nominated that year? I think it was just like 15 shows in a small amount of time trying to hit the Tony deadline, and maybe they should have waited.
Yeah, maybe so. That's a great point.
But you never know.
You don't ever know. It is a gamble. It is absolutely a gamble. And you don't know what's going to be the hot button issue for Tony voters in any given time. You don't know what's going to open, and you just don't know.
Especially because, Ava and Jeremy are both like the up and coming, like this is the next generation of
absolutely
bankable stars.
No doubt.
They're both excellent at what they do. And they can headline and hold a show without any problems, like anything whatsoever. So, I thought that they would get a lot more attention. I
agree.
Very surprised by that. I wonder, there's a huge part of me that wonders kind of what did it. And I think some of it, and I'm basing this a little bit on some of the critical response, but also my own listening to the show. This show requires them to not be their affable selves. They have both absolutely made careers on, characters that are not, so far from themselves.
Right.
Like they're not character actors. They're leading men. This is not like, and they're having to do some kind of sophisticated stuff. And it was really interesting to listen and kind of watch some of the performances in this, because you're watching just how good of an actor, especially Jeremy Jordan. I was like, I didn't know you had that in you. Good job.
Yeah.
But what I realized was that, so there's a song in Gatsby that's called Only Tea, and you can hear in his voice, you can hear in Jeremy Jordan's voice how he's portraying this character. It's a very different kind of vocal inflection than he has in other records, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Then you get to the next song, and he sounds just like he did in Newsies. And she sounds just like she did in her big hit. And then in another thing, like, Ava sounds completely different in the very first song. It's inconsistent, but I don't know that they are being inconsistent. I wonder if they're being directed that way.
Right.
Because where it is inconsistent are these beautiful love ballads, these beautiful songs that, will be around in the canon. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'm going to hear them on my hallway for a long time, because they are really, they're very well constructed. All of it is beautiful. But anytime they have a moment together, they kind of drop it. It's like they drop out of the character and sing it as like, so that it's like we had 3 or 4 songs that we wanted to like put on the radio. Mm-hmm. And so it couldn't be stylized almost.
Right.
And I thought that was really interesting. And I'd love to know how the tours are handling it, if they're doing it that way too. So I'm just kind of interested to see, like, was it done that way on purpose? Were they trying to do a marketing thing?
Yeah.
To try to, because that's how we know those two characters. And if you put them too stylized, and we all go, oh, but where's my love ballad by Jeremy Jordan?
Right, right. Well, and what's interesting is neither one of them stayed with the show super long.
No.
Like, they both left in under a year, which seems to be, now maybe, I don't know, maybe they had other big things they were going to. I don't know that. Mm-hmm. But they both left, I think, by January of 25. And that's for such a huge role, what should be such a huge role, that seems like a short time to stay with the show. I don't know why they left. I don't know.
Has it closed on Broadway?
No, it's still running. And in fact, it's still running pretty healthily. It's still running about 85 to 90% full. So
has it recouped
pretty
costs?
Healthy? I don't know. That's a great question. It's a $25 million show. I don't know if it has recouped. I should know that, but I don't. I haven't seen that.
We'll have to see. But they didn't get any. I mean, they didn't get any accolades really at all.
And maybe that's why they left. I don't know.
I mean, it's not helping. It behooves them to move on to try to get more of those accolades. I think, but I don't know. I mean, the critical response to this particular show, and as you know, one of the things that we don't really want to be like. One of the reasons we started the podcast is because we didn't want people like, oh, what am I going to see? And let's look at this and have a critique ruin it for you, right? Mm-hmm. A critique just not allow you to enjoy it. So we try very hard to kind of open it up. What I will tell you about this one is that the reviews are not friendly.
They're not warm. No.
Not warm. Not friendly. They're not friendly here. They're not friendly in England, where it just opened. Like, it's really interesting how unfriendly they are. I mean, to a point where I'm like, this doesn't feel totally justified. I understand the critical response. I understand what they're saying and their problems with it. I just was like, this just feels unnecessarily harsh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we don't want you going and reading something and being like, ooh, So I'll just warn you, like, this is what the critical response is. The critical response is having trouble reconciling their nostalgia with what is on stage. It doesn't mean there isn't value there. Like, I think this show does have quite a bit of value.
Well, and I think, kind of one of the it wasn't a headline, but this kind of sums it up, is that they have forgotten that ultimately The Great Gatsby is a tragedy, right? There's way too much focus on the fun and dance and glitz and glamour of the jazz age and not enough on the actual tragic end, right, of this story.
Well, how often does tragedy work?
Right.
Musicals.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so the music, like you've got different, yes. And I can see that. So.
But, you know, I also wonder, and I don't know this because I really just thought of it, but I wonder if there is some sort of prejudice. One of the reasons why it did not win the Tony, one of the reasons why it wasn't more even celebrated on Broadway, though it continues to run. And like I said, it has healthy houses. So, you know, while reviewers may not have loved it, audience seemed to enjoy it, right? So
and schools and colleges are going to pick it up and run it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
This is going to have a healthy life.
Right. So. But I do wonder, is there some prejudice for the Gatsby American Myth, right? Directed by Rachel Chavkin, who, you know,
who did Hades
Town, not Natasha Pierre. Yes,
just brilliant.
Right. Brilliant director. And I wonder if there was some sort of bias towards that production. And so I read an article in which the writer of the article was trying to show the differences between the two. And in every single facet, it was clear that this writer preferred the Gatsby. One. Yes, the American Myth. It's apparently a lot darker. It does kind of hone in on the tragic components. It's a lot. It's seedier and edgier, and I just wonder if there is a bias towards that production for whatever reason,
knowing that it's coming,
and they knew it was coming, and so they're like, well, we're not going to make this the iconic Broadway Gatsby. We're going to wait for the Chavkin Gatsby, which ironically, news came out in July of 2025 that production was switching directors, and replacing Chavkin with David Cromer, who had previously directed, he's done mostly play directing on Broadway, but he had directed The Band's Visit, which is one of my favorite shows.
Really?
I love that show. Love it.
I did
love it.
I did not appreciate it as
my husband did not either. I don't often make him go to shows, but I love that one so much that I was like, you got to go with me. And he goes and he's like, really? And I'm like, no, I'm
going to need to see it through your eyes then, because I just remember going, I have no idea what's going on here. I need a Dr. Broadway podcast on this to figure out what's happening.
Well, I do have notes on that. So we could pull that one together very quickly. Okay. I love that show. But David Cromer, but that tells you, I mean, if you know The Band's Visit, it is not a song and dance show at all. It is a very intimate story told very simply and very beautifully, in my opinion. And, you know, that's one of the key distinctives between The Great Gatsby on Broadway now, which is all about the jazz age and the singing and the dancing, and Gatsby and American Myth, which is edgier, darker, smaller, and, music, I should mention here, the music for Gatsby and American Myth is by Florence Welch and Thomas Bartlett, with lyrics by Welch, and the book for the show is by Martina Majok. So I don't know, but I wonder if there's a bias, like we're waiting for Gatsby to kind of crown it the official Broadway sanctioned version of this book. I don't know.
So the thing is about Broadway is, like, you have to put your name down to get into a house, and sometimes you don't know how long that's going to take, et cetera, and so on. And you don't usually do that until you think it's ready. You know, part of me wonders if they just got lucky with the house and their name got called first.
Yeah, very. I don't know the politics of it.
You know, because it's not normal for you to have two versions of the same title. Like we saw that with The Wild Party, yet another.
2000.
Wild Party's by Fitzgerald too, right?
No, it's similar. No, it's a jazz age.
It's a jazz age something.
I mean, if you saw, you did see the Lipa. She saw the Lipa version, which was off Broadway. I saw the Michael John LaChiusa version, which was on Broadway. but either one of them could be the Great Gatsby. I mean, they're so similar in themes. It's about the jazz age and the drinking and the all the stuff,
and everybody kind of like comes down on their own side of which one they like the best.
Exactly.
That is the exception, not the rule. Usually what happens is if there's something that's incredibly similar, the show just kind of languishes and bows out because you can't have competing like titles. Like
it's the
you can't
same story.
you cannot do that because you are going to split the revenue. It's not going, there's no way to convince investors, oh, please invest in this one because
it's better for these reasons.
It really is better. And they're like, but we already have one and it didn't do well. So why would we do, and so we're going to see if this new one actually comes to Broadway.
We'll see what happens.
And I agree with you that maybe that is why the reviews feel a little biased because it feels like everybody was frustrated that one won the race to Broadway.
First. Yeah, it got there first.
I mean, and it does happen all the time. Like I watched this with The Circus in Winter and Water for Elephants, and it just was like, okay, white flag. We're not going to move forward. We see these things happen, and it's unfortunate because sometimes you have a great musical that probably would have done incredibly well, but somebody got there first.
Right.
And when somebody gets there first,
pivot.
It's the thing about art. This is what happens.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's a race to who's going to get there first. But
yeah. And it's not that there can never again be another Gatsby, right? Yeah. We can interpret things a lot of different ways, and we know that's why we have multiple different productions. We talked in our last episode about cabaret and how I think there's cabaret fatigue because we keep doing cabaret in these very different ways. But people would Damn Yankees is a great exception or great example. One of my all-time favorite shows. There's a new production that just opened at Arena Stage in DC, very likely to go to New York, and they changed it pretty significantly in ways that, I'll see it, but until I found out about the changes, I had planned to drive to DC and back to see it, so I could see it right away. Then I read about the changes and I'm like, it may be good, but I'll wait. I'll see it when it's easy, when it comes someplace close by or when I'm in New York and it's there. And so we can interpret things differently. There is space for that. But maybe the wiser approach is let's hold off and give this show its moment. And then we'll come back with our own Gatsby in a couple of years, a decade, whatever.
Yeah.
There's room for that. But doing two at the same time, you kind of offset each other.
Especially when we start this episode being like, all of the producers are saying, we can't cover our costs and this. That's right. This is this isn't a good business move. Right. Even if it's the better artistic work, which I don't know that it is because I know nothing about it. But it's like, even if that is really what was going on here. I think that's just literally all to say, like, there's value in this show. There's a lot. Remember what you're bringing into the room with you with your own nostalgia, but tune out the noise to everybody else's nostalgia as well. Like if we tune out a little bit of it and see where you come down on how it struck you, because the one thing I do know about works that get multiple versions by different people is that they strike people differently. It's why you like the Michael John LaChiusa and I like Andrew Lupa.
Absolutely, so, for sure. 100%. 100%. And just to kind of put a pin on that conversation, the LaChiusa version played Broadway in 2000. Lipa was off Broadway in 2000. And they, even I read an interview by Lipa. He was talking in relationship to this happening again with Gatsby. And he was saying, it was confusing because people would say, oh, I'm going to go see the Wild Party. And the friend would say, I'm going to get tickets. And they'd end up with tickets to two different shows because they were running concurrently on Broadway and off. So there's just a lot of complicating factors. I do have to assume that if they've switched directors, I don't know why Chav can bow out. Maybe she got another project. I don't know.
But if they've switched directors, I would have been like, we lost the race. Like, I'll come back in 5 years. Maybe.
And she's so in demand. I mean, it's very likely that she got another great project. But they've brought in a great director who's directed a former, best musical in The Band's Visit. And so they must have big plans for it.
Yeah.
Because they didn't just let it die. If she had to leave for whatever reason, they did make sure it was in very capable hands.
Yeah, they think it's worth doing this close. So even in this market that is so tenuous. So we're interested to watch.
We'll follow it up. I'm sure it'll be on tour at some point, and we'll do a micromester about Gatsby and American Men.
There we go.
All right, so that'll do it for this episode of the Dr. Broadway podcast. Tune in next time when we'll be talking about The Notebook, which opened on Broadway in 2024 and is based, of course, on the book by Nicholas Sparks. Of course, there is a film of this as well. Until then, you can connect with us via email at hello@drbroadway.com or on Instagram, YouTube, or TikTok at Dr. Bway Podcast.